I'm Ann Morris, the co-chair of the Salmon Arm Ecumenical Kairos Committee, which is part of the National Kairos Network, which is comprised of 11 Christian churches and religious organizations. And here in Salmon Arm, we've got 4 different churches that are involved in the local Kairos group. Just to let you know, people who are not familiar with the area, that the washrooms are straight down the hall. Just turn to the left before you get to the doors. And I'm going to call on Dr. Warren Bell, who's somewhere around here, to introduce our speaker and facilitate the program.
Yeah, the red dot.
An altitude issue always comes up with microphones. I'm delighted to welcome you all to a presentation I think you'll learn a great deal from on not just solar power in principle, but solar power in practice. We're lucky to have tonight Professor from Thompson Rivers University, who is very different from your average professor in that he's branched out into the world of business and into the world of practical advocacy in communities with regard to solar power. Michael Mehta, we had the pleasure of breaking bread with him this evening, and we had a very lively conversation over supper about many things, and I think you'll learn how advanced and sophisticated solar power is, and how productive it is, and how affordable it is, and how communities around the world are already using it, and how a community like ours could easily begin to take advantage of the blessings of solar power. Michael is a professor of geography and environmental studies at TRU, but that's only a small slice of his activities over the years. I won't list all of the advocacy groups and organizations in the community that he's founded, but it ranges from solar to another interest of his, which is clean air and air pollution, and covers a lot to do with how you take esoteric knowledge about science and you implement it in a community setting. Now I'm going to start off with a couple of slides just to set the stage before Michael comes up, because solar power is unique among energy sources in our world. And I think that's something you need to have in perspective before you'll really understand the message that Michael is bringing us tonight. So, the question. The answer to that question is a lot, but to specify it a little more clearly, this is a graphic that shows you, in very simple terms, how enormous the amount of energy coming from the sun really is. It dwarfs any other source of energy on this planet, and of course, we all know that the seasons and the movement of air on our planet is determined by solar radiation, as is the functioning of many of our radio transmitter devices. And once in a while, the sun sends us a little message to remind us how vulnerable we are to the vagaries of solar radiation. But the size of the big yellow circle illustrates how clearly, is that a pointer? 23,000 terabytes per year. All of the terabyte use, all the electricity use in the world right now is 16. 23,000 versus 16. Even if you're not an arithmetic genius, you can understand that's an enormous difference. And all the other sources down the side here are really quite modest compared to solar energy. So in essence, what we're looking at is a massive potential that, if properly utilized, could really change the face of our existence. Another thing that you probably need to know is that when you build solar installations, you don't risk so many of the things that we actually know are horrible consequences of things like nuclear power with its radioactive waste, fossil fuel industries with gases creating global climate change and air pollution, and many other wood. Even just burning wood stoves creates a tremendous amount of pollution that is actually quite deleterious to both human health and planetary existence. One other thing you should know before we start is that we live in a distorted world where the distortion comes from our own behavior. And one behavior is the amount of money that we use to subsidize the dominant fuel source, energy source in our world right now, which is fossil fuels. If you got, as you can see down, oops, be careful what you do, down here, in a year, or over a 5-year period, you get this much subsidy given to the fossil fuel system. You get that much money given to solar energy sources. So when we've skewed the system and tilted the playing field so it's essentially almost a cliff, it's a downward slope at a very steep angle, we've created an artificial solution that makes, in this particular case, fossil fuel energy look very attractive, when in fact it's propped up by massive financial support from our current governmental and regulatory structures. And that's something to keep in mind, because if you think solar is hard to work with, that's because you're being made to be in a position where it's hard to work with, not because it's really hard to work with. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Michael Maida to come forward and speak to you about something he knows a great deal about. Thank you very much, Mike.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's really gratifying to see so many people here that are willing to become potentially photon farmers. I'm thrilled for the invitation from Ann Morris and her group, and really happy that Dr. Bell is here to introduce me. It's amazing. As I talk about solar around the province and in other parts of Canada, I was just up in Inuvik in the summer months, there's a similar kind of response. There's a similar kind of anticipation. People have been wanting to embrace solar in many cases for decades. And a lot of the people that I talked to were early explorers of solar energy in the 70s. And they were tinkerers, and they started maybe with their own small arrays. Well, I have to tell you that we live in a glorious era now because the technology has matured. And the cost has declined 90% in 10 years. And the number of solar installations that we're seeing on a global scale are staggering. So I want to share with you tonight some examples of this, and I want to also go over some more detailed things about the logistics of setting up perhaps your own solar array, as well as a community array, either through something like a co-op or a nonprofit. So I'll give you lots of concrete examples, but again, in the spirit of setting a little bit of context, I want to talk to you a little bit about the mind shift that needs to occur. And here's a great quote from Stephen Chu, Nobel Prize winner in physics. As the saying goes, the Stone Age did not end because we ran out of stones. We transitioned to better solutions. The same opportunity lies before us with energy efficiency and clean energy. There certainly are reserves of fossil fuels on planet Earth that will last hundreds of years, although I have to say that we may not last hundreds of years if we continue to use them. Just because we've got 300 years of coal in Saskatchewan and maybe 400 years in Alberta doesn't mean that we have a right to continue to exploit that. Our planetary systems, the balance of energy, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and all of these things that are driving climate change simply won't survive that. Maybe not even 20 more years. So there's an incredible incentive to change. There's a credible opportunity to change. So we're really lucky that we have this gift of solar power, which isn't new, by the way. It's been around for more than 70 years. There were many major discoveries in the 1950s that really got this revolution going. And lest you think that we're talking about things in the future, I want to dispel that myth right now. This is not future technology. This is today. In fact, I might even argue that it was yesterday. Yet, we haven't embraced it fully yet. So there's a great opportunity. Look back in the history of humanity, look back in the history of the Western world and how we've worked with technologies, how we have shelved many technologies in particular. We know, for instance, that if you go back to the 1880s to the early part of the 20th century, that the vast majority of automobile manufacturers in North America were actually electric. You know that? Mm-hmm. But there were hundreds of electrical car manufacturers. They were the thing for women drivers at the time. They didn't like the noisy, polluting, smelling cars back then. And there were a lot of cars that were running on alcohol as well. And it was through the dominance of the oil industry and the establishment of its infrastructure and its connection to government, and eventually the creation of what I might call a petrostate, that this technology became dominant. We also know that the fuel cell, this wonderful device for converting fuel, be it hydrogen or other things, into electricity by running it through a membrane to create an electrical difference, is a technology that also is more than 100 years old. So this isn't new stuff. This is stuff that we have pretty much understood for a long time. It's simply a lack of awareness and a lack of will to put it in place. Now, you need to see that solar can also be beautiful. And this is actually my dream. If anybody in Salmon Arm wants to do this, please call me. I have been looking at land art for a long time. And if you go onto Facebook, if you're one of those kind of people that fall into that space occasionally and get lost, it's an addiction, by the way. It really is. Trust me. Got it. You're going to find all kinds of images of incredible land art made from solar arrays. And there's no reason why, like a knitting pattern, you can't make it look like anything you want. It's just squares and rectangles. And you can move them around, and you can configure them on the ground, and you can have different colored ones and different colored frames to create beautiful art. So it doesn't have to be ugly. It can be part of the landscape. And that's good, because there's 1 million of these installed every day around the world. 1 million a day. And going back to what Dr. Bell started off with, the energy from the sun that falls on planet Earth in 1 hour, another way of putting it, is equivalent to our total annual energy consumption. Now let's look at what's happening around the world, this 1 million a day. Some of these are old, some of these are newer. This is a classic bridge in Germany called the Kennedy Bridge. It's over the Rhine River. Think of all the bridges that we have in BC, all the overpasses on highways as well, by the way, that may be facing south, they don't have to be, that could be clad with solar modules like this. Look at this gorgeous stadium from Taiwan. I mean, think about how we use sport facilities, and it doesn't have to be as grand as this. Most of the time, they're sitting empty. Why aren't we making money from them at the same time? It's a mindset shift to start thinking about using infrastructure to actually generate revenue, rather than the other way around. And I'll show you more examples of that. Look at what they've done in Paris with their railway between Paris and Amsterdam. 16,000 solar modules on this building, 3.4 kilometers long. And that's a massive amount of power. I'll give you some more perspective on the numbers in a bit. Now, this is very similar to what Warren had, but it's just a different way of depicting it. The big cube, in this case, is the total annual irradiation that falls on planet Earth. And the bottom right-hand cube there is the annual world usage of energy. And you'll see that there's absolutely no way we'll get anywhere close to using any fraction that's reasonable of the annual irradiation. If you look on the left-hand side at the various other cubes, the size of them represents the overall available reserves. And if you do a little extrapolation, ignoring everything else like climate change, which I don't recommend you do, you'll see that eventually we will run out very quickly of these other things. Another way to depict that is if you look at all of the known coal, oil, and natural gas reserves, They're the equivalent of 20 days of power from the sun. All of them. So it's a no-brainer. Now, some people say, wow, that's great in theory. I don't really want solar panels everywhere on the planet, and I don't want them on every building, and they're ugly and everything else, which I don't agree with. I think they're beautiful. But how much land mass do you actually need? And there have been lots of organizations that have done these kinds of calculations. This particular one here shows the physical area of land in square meters or kilometers, whatever metric they're using, of solar panels that would cover the needs of a region or of the entire planet. So, for example, if you look at the entire planet, this square here, if it were a solar farm, and nobody would put it all in one spot, especially in the ocean, would be equivalent to all of the world's total energy consumption. These little squares here, which are almost impossible to see, that would be all of Canada. So we're not talking about a huge amount of space. By the way, did you know that the tar sands in northern Alberta are bigger than Florida? Yeah. So let's be honest about this. Let's put these things in perspective, and that's about 4% of the world's oil supply. So, really. Okay. So what has been happening? Well, China is the global, pretty much uncontested leader when it comes to manufacturing solar modules and equipment. Korea is coming in very strong and makes some incredibly good product as well. One of the products that my clients like in particular is one made by LG. So, you know, LG, the same company that makes your refrigerators and everything else, they make an incredibly good solar module. But China is by far the global leader. They have spent billions of dollars. The government of China has subsidized the industry billions of dollars a year to create incentives for companies to start up, new factories to be built, better technology, cleaner rooms for handling the silicon and growing the crystals and everything else. And they have single-handedly put pressure on every other part of the world to come up to standard and to improve their quality. In spite of that, people still say, no, I don't want something made in China because they've got that stigma. But I'll tell you, they make some of the best solar equipment on the planet. Now, they have been expanding not only their manufacturing, but their deployment. And it's kind of an ironic thing. Because on one hand, we know that they're building a lot of dams. They were building a lot of hydro projects. They were also still burning a lot of coal and building more coal projects. And a lot of the coal from Canada is exported to China. But at the same time, they've run into a bit of a catch-22 with that, especially with coal. People are dying in the millions. And the red alert days in places like Beijing were like our smoky summers, but many days of the year, year after year, decade after decade. And the consequences for human health and for the environment were mounting and becoming so self-evident that people said, forget it, we need to shift gears. So instead of just manufacturing and exporting their technology, they started to deploy it to build massive solar farms. And that's what we have here. This is an example of a farm. It's one of the biggest in the world. 4 million solar modules. It takes 25 square kilometers of land. But it's enough if we extrapolate it and do the conversions to how much power we use. And we use a lot more power than the average Chinese household, by the way. That solar farm is the equivalent of operating about 140,000 homes in Canada or the US. Just that one. So I took the liberty of doing a little bit of math for you and saying, just to show you what you could do. And again, I want to preface my remarks, I'm not suggesting you do this. I'm suggesting that you consider doing it on a smaller scale. But just to give you the outlying range, the full range of what you could do. So in Salmon Arm, based on 2016 Stats Canada data that I found, including the outer region, or greater region, you have a population of 18,000. That came to about 6,000 households, so a very small fraction of what this big farm could do. So that would be overkill. You could run Kamloops and Kelowna probably, and Salmon Arm at the same time and sell them the power. Not a bad idea either. Do you have 25 square kilometers of land around? 5K by 5K? I think I drove by about 100 of those just on the way here. So yeah, you could do that. But anyway, if you just wanted to power your own city in a greater region, that would be 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer approximately. I didn't do the full math, but it's round about that number. And that would do it. 1K by 1K, 1,000 meters by 1,000 meters of solar farm would power your city. Okay, so now that I get interested. Well, that's great, but still a really slow revolution, even notwithstanding what I've just told you. And if you look at what's happening around the world, still 76% or so of all our energy still comes from non-renewables. It's got so much inertia, there's so much weight of influence and history and government and subsidies and interlocks and boards and various things that are impairing, blocking, and misleading people about the promise of renewable energy. You've been lied to for many years about renewable energy and whether or not it can work. The same way that you were lied to about electric cars. And there are a lot of people in here now, I've seen you drive in, that have electric cars. I picked one up myself in January. And it's the best. I will never go back to driving a gas or a diesel vehicle after driving an electric car. And all those myths and stories about range and everything else that I was told were so strong and so embedded in my subconscious. It took one drive, a couple of hours with it, and talking to people who've had them, and guess what? That fell apart like a house of cards. Same thing is happening in solar. And it's just a matter of keeping your mind open. So we got a long way to go. So what can you do here? How do we measure the potential for solar anywhere in the world? Well, the solar modules have improved dramatically in the last 10 years. In the last 2 years, they've gotten leaps and bounds better. And they're able to work in even lower light conditions than before. They don't need direct sunlight, although direct is good. And they work at a much wider set of angles, so they don't even have to be facing due south. In fact, if you look at a roof of a house that's got east-west facing like mine does, you can adjust the number of modules on that roof and still make as much power as a south-facing roof with just slightly less modules. There are ways around this with simple mathematics and angles, which is what any solar provider can do. So the way we figure it out is by looking at something called sunshine hours. And sunshine hours vary, of course. Here are some examples from BC. Kamloops, 2080, Kelowna, 1949, Penticton, 1923, Vernon, 2027. You are, from what I can tell, just based on my background, about 2,000 hours a year, in that range. And if you compare that even to places that we think of traditionally as rainy, cloudy, and awful, and maybe not good solar places, like Nanaimo, you'd be wrong. I started my company and the nonprofits before that in Nanaimo and on Gabriola Island, and we have some of the highest producing solar facilities. Because 1,940 hours is only about 10% or less than the sunniest spots in the province. So you can make up that difference by adding a couple of extra solar modules. They're so cheap now. So how does that compare? So in the abstract, this really doesn't tell you much, but I want you to look at Germany. Certain parts of Germany that are global leaders in solar power. Wow, we have 25% more sunshine hours than Germany, and they are putting these everywhere. The Germans aren't stupid. They know that it's cheaper to put on the solar than it is to make power from other sources. And they are doing it at 75% of our potential. So there's no question that it works, and I know it does because I've built more than 30 solar arrays in the last 2 years in the interior and at the coast, and they are performing incredibly well. Okay, so here's some of them. And I need to let you know that it doesn't have to be big. We don't have to build a kilometer by kilometer. If you have a nice small house, a 2,000 square foot or 1,500 square foot house or something smaller, you can do anything like this. So on the top left-hand corner is a client in North Kamloops. In the spring, they put 16 solar modules on the roof, It's approximately a 5 kilowatt system, which means that in full sunshine it makes about 5,000 watts of power. And we estimate, based on the angles of that roof and other factors in the neighborhood, that it will make about 6,000 kilowatt hours per year of electricity. That house uses about 5,000 kilowatt hours per year of electricity. So it's making more than it uses, and it's going to get, at the end of the year, a credit from BC Hydro. I'll tell you more about how that works later. This system cost the clients, for the equipment, $9,000. And they did most of the installation themselves. They went up on the roof and they screwed them down and everything. I showed them how. And then they brought an electrician in for $600 at the end to finish it off. Most people would be charged over $20,000, $25,000 for a system like that. So this is how much things have changed in recent years. Now, that on the right-hand bottom corner is a garage. This is on Gabriola Island. It's a 24 by 24 foot garage. It's a nice garage. You should see the house. Ocean, house, pool, the die for Architectural Digest house. And this garage has 28 modules on the roof. They're super high performing LG module that I mentioned earlier. They're 320 watts each. So this is about an 8.6 kilowatt array, 8,600 watts. And we estimate that there, because it's not as good as here, that it'll make about 10,000 to 10,500 kilowatt hours per year. It ran for a year. It came in just shy of that, but we had a horrible year and there was smoke there too. But it made over 10,000 this year. So we're pretty close in our estimates. This here is a house in Raleigh, just north of Kamloops on the river, not too far from town. And again, the 16 solar modules. They had the full installation done, and it came to about $13,000, $14,000 range. This one is in Chase, up on the hill there, and they have two arrays on their property. This one is on their hay barn, and they have one on their woodshed. And they have 30 modules overall. These are bigger modules. These are 330 watts each as well, but they're physically bigger. And this makes about 12,000 kilowatt hours a year. They're neutral on their power for 25,000 range. This one here is the biggest one that I did. It is just outside of Kamloops past Sun Rivers on East Shuswap Road. It's 136 solar modules. And it's on the ground of the client with his friends. Built the racks themselves out of just 2x4s and 4x4s of the material. And they poured the concrete and made the pads. This array is 34 kilowatts, 34,000 watts of power. It will make about 45,000 kilowatt hours a year because of the modules we used. And they paid $60,000 for it. And that's enough to power 4 standard homes in BC. Here's another. This is the newest. This is the biggest solar tracker in British Columbia right now, residential solar tracker. And this one is in Black Pines, just outside of Kamloops again, north along the river, past on West Side Road. So if you know Kamloops, about 20 minutes outside of town on West Side Road towards the reserve. It is a 45 module tracker. And what a tracker does is quite different than anything else. Is it actually, this is called a dual axis. It follows the sun throughout the day. So it actually turns every couple of minutes. It does it quite a little, and shifts, like a sunflower to keep always aligned with the sun to maximize power production. And then it also changes its angle seasonally by the time of year. It's all pre-programmed into it based on the GPS coordinates of the device to maximize power production. So on the longest days of the year, it's almost horizontal. And in the shortest days of the year, when the sun is down at the horizon, it's almost vertical. So it's adjusting in 2 planes all the time. And because it's doing that, that alone makes 40% more power per year than if it were static or not moving. The other thing to note about this is that it's a pretty sophisticated system. It has an anemometer on it, so it can detect wind speed. And if it surpasses a certain threshold where there could be damage to the device, it goes what's called tabletop. It goes completely flat. And that minimizes the lift, protects it from being like a sail or wing. And the other thing is in the winter, it has snow load detectors on it. When it hits a certain threshold of weight, it goes completely vertical and the snow rolls off. But there's more. Am I selling Ginsu knives here? There's more. There's something very special about the modules. That's the owners, Penny and Charles. Can you see the light through them?
Yep.
Yeah, you can't see light through most solar modules. These modules are semi-transparent and they don't have a backing on them, and they are called bifacial modules. What they do is, like a regular solar module, when light comes through the top, the photons dislodge electrons in the semiconductor material, creating the electric current. But when it passes through the module and bounces off grass, snow, or whatever, except water, everything except water, it creates something called the albedo effect. And that radiation that bounces back from the ground snow or whatever goes through the back of the modules, and it makes another 20% of power on the backside, on the flip side. This isn't cheap. I don't want to get you all excited. This system, first of all, put it in perspective. With those features that I've told you about, tracking and bifacial modules, it's all high-end, really high-end stuff. This will make about 25,000 kilowatt hours a year. That's enough to power 2 full homes that are really thirsty. It's a $90,000 system installed. Okay? But it is the first of its kind. We think that as we get more precise with the installation, it'll come down. So here's what's happening. I need to show you some pictures of what groups are doing, communities are doing, and others. There's lots of residential, but there's more to it than that. The top left-hand corner is one of the biggest solar arrays recently commissioned about a year ago. The Lower Nicola Band built this school array on their elementary school in Merritt. 85.8 kilowatts. It's about 350 solar panels on that roof. That's big. On the bottom left-hand corner is Salt Spring Island Secondary School. I worked with them when they were initially starting this project. And what they were doing was they wanted to create something that they eventually called the Solar Scholarship. They wanted to create a solar array that involved community fundraising to buy the array. It cost them $60,000 for this array. It's 84 modules. And the money that they get from selling that power back to BC Hydro supports 2 students every year with college and university scholarships, the solar scholarship. So they went out with hat into the thing. It took them 2 years to raise the money. They put it on the school with the school board's blessing, and it wasn't that hard apparently. And then they've got this perpetual scholarship, which will always go up as electricity rates go up. Anybody here think they're going to go down? So that money, the dividend from the selling back of that power will always go back up, and it will create a growing scholarship for at least 30 years. That's kind of neat. Then we have the Nelson Solar Garden. My nonprofit originally sold them the equipment for this at a smoking price because we wanted to support other nonprofits and co-ops. And this is a 50 kilowatt, 200 module-ish array. It might be a little bit less because they're bigger modules. I forget the exact, 186 I think it was. And what they did was this group arranged a buying agreement with the Nelson Power Utility to buy back the power and to basically provide dividends. So I think the share offer, if I'm not mistaken, was $1,000 a piece. And then they were able to sell shares to buy into this, and then everybody gets a check. So that's kind of cool. You know, if you don't want to spend money for your own, or you can't, maybe you're not in the right location, or you don't own your property, or you're living in a condo or something, this allows people to buy into a solar array like they couldn't before. I like that idea. And then we've got the Kimberley Sun Mine, which is a public-private ventureship. It's the largest solar system in BC. It's a little over a megawatt. So to give you some perspective, it's about 50 times bigger than the Salt Spring School project. But it's all on trackers, on smaller trackers, like the big one I showed you, but they're smaller. And the neat thing about this project is that it's on a decommissioned mine site. So instead of spending the tens of millions or whatever it would have taken to bring that back to greenfield conditions and get out the contaminants in the soil, there's a lot of work involved in that. They were able to do a minimum amount of that, change the use of that land, put a solar farm on it, and use that money that they would have used for decontamination to buy the equipment. Wow. I mean, this is what's happening. Japan is doing this all the time, by the way, right now with golf courses. Golf is a dying sport, if you haven't noticed. Dying for me. I did it 3 times and it died. Really died. But it's not doing that well in some places like Japan. So what they've done is they've decided to turn many of their golf courses into solar farms. I like that too. Okay, this is brand new, just commissioned recently in Haida Gwaii. And this is actually not the whole thing. The whole thing is much bigger, and it's on community buildings. This is their artistic representational one, and it's, 8, 10, 12 modules or whatever, 4, 8, 10, 12, yeah. And it's meant to represent the number of modules that they are targeting that each household will have access to in this bigger system. Kind of what they think based on their lifestyle, the size of the houses that they live in and everything else. What the offset would be, the neutralizing point, is about 12 solar modules in that case. So that's just a representation. An artistic was a beautiful sculpture in the middle of what each household will have the equivalent of in their overall network of arrays. I really like that too. Now Banff has moved in this direction too. They've been installing solar farms and modules on various facilities. Here's an example of a really big one. This would dwarf almost everything except Sunline here in BC of 280 kilowatts. And you can see that it's intended specifically to save money. And it was the result of various Canada 150 infrastructure funds and other things. Did you know that municipalities get gas tax revenue back from the federal government every year? And that it's nothing to sneeze at? I don't know what Salmon Arm gets, but in Kamloops it's like $500,000 a year. Every year. And the municipal councillors, they often don't tell people about these things because they don't want to have competition for it. They use it for other things. We've been using it for things like upgrading hockey arenas and the like. But it's supposed to be used for jump-starting green initiatives. But they've changed the language a little bit to give municipalities some wiggle room. Why don't you guys, if you want to start something big in solar here, get some of that tax money back and use it to seed your own program? I would do that. So here's some other things that are happening. This is Tesla. You've seen Tesla cars perhaps. You drooled over them. Well, this is the newest product. This is the Tesla roof. And it's an integrated solar module into the roofing material. It's sexy, it's sleek. Unfortunately, they're not the most honest with how they price it. When they first came out, they were saying to people, buy our product, pre-buy our product like they do everything online. And it's going to be cheaper than buying a new roof with just standard shingles. Well, that's not quite true. It is if you use Tesla mathematics, which means include the 25 years of energy savings in that upfront cost. That's what they do. So if you're waiting for Tesla solar roofs, that's great. I would love one too. But I'll tell you, to do a house like that with a Tesla solar roof is going to be $250,000. This ain't going to be cheap. So don't wait. We have something that is just as sexy that you can buy now for a fraction of that price. Look at this. This is a solar module. This is that bifacial solar module that I was telling you about that makes power on both sides. This is the ugly side. This is the back side. I don't know, it looks like a beautiful gleaming jewel to me. So the technology's there. You might want one of these. You've probably seen these online. This is the Smart Flower. It's also a tracker. It follows the sun. And it kind of folds itself up at night, and it folds itself up to protect itself during hail and wind and things like that. And the neat thing about the Smart Flower is that it comes with other options. So for example, you can get an electric car charger built into it. I think that would be fantastic for like a commercial mall or a library or some kind of community hall or something like that, to have one of these. The other thing that you can get with it is backup batteries. Not Tesla batteries, but their own proprietary batteries at this point. it's going to probably be about $60,000. And it's probably, from what I've been reading, about a 5 kilowatt system, so it's very expensive per watt. But it looks nice, and it's modular, and you can drop it. You don't have to do a lot of installation. You can drop it and screw it down with ground anchors, and then run some conduit into your load. So it's very simple to deploy. I think that's one of the big advantages. But that's nothing. Here's what I've been doing. This is Canada's first solar sidewalk and solar road. Would you like to see a piece of it? Pass that around, sir. What I'm passing around is the first generation product. It doesn't look like that now. It's thicker, stronger, and it's all black because I wanted black aesthetics. But it can be any color. And this is a specially encased polymer. It's a series of polymers with a fiberglass substrate. You can change the background color to anything, including rainbow colors if you like. And you can put it on the ground. It's meant to be driven on, walked on, ridden on, whatever, and it makes electricity. So we broke ground on a solar compass today. So before I came here today in a rush, I was full of concrete dust. I still am, actually. If you keep an eye on our website, you'll see it as it evolves, and we're going to be posting some drone footage very soon. But this is what we did before that, over the summer. And this is Canada's first solar sidewalk, on campus as well, and Cam lives at TRU. And what we did was we took an existing sidewalk, instead of tearing the whole thing up, we basically used a concrete saw and cut a 6-inch channel, 6-inch wide, 2-inch deep channel, and hacked it out with a jackhammer. Made it all nice and smooth, and this is basically the raceway for the modules. So the modules sit flush on top of the concrete. They're only 6 millimeters thick, less than 1/4 of an inch. So there's no real issue there with tripping. And what we see here is the raceway, the wiring to connect all the modules together. And this is the module itself. What you're looking at that's going around is one of the cells. So this is a cell. And each of these modules have 20 cells. And this is what it looks like when it's done, when it's screwed and glued down. We put a stainless steel frame around it to make it look pretty. And it is powering one of the small buildings that it's connected to, one of our office buildings.
Scuffing. How quickly will you lose?
Yeah, so you felt the surface, right? That surface is one that can be reapplied. So it is it's a polymer with glass pieces in it that are meant to prevent you from slipping. You can't slip on this. It's got much more friction than anything that you've walked on. So when it wears down from shoveling and other things, you can reapply this. We have a reapplication kit that comes with them, just like rolling on driveway sealer. And you can choose how aggressive you want that to be.
Won't it become opaque quickly?
No, it's got stabilizers in it for UV stability. Yeah, it's pretty advanced technology.
5 years?
We're hoping 20. we put years of development on this project. And we have a team of 30 engineers and others that were developing it. So there's a lot of people working on this. It's going to improve for sure. So this is what it looks like inside the house. These are microinverters, like this. Pass that. So a little sharp on the edges because it's connected to a rail system. Normally you would use the rails to attach it to the roof. So just mind your fingers. So what a microinverter does is it takes the power that the module makes, the solar panel, that's DC power, it's just like a battery, and it converts it to AC instantly to run your house. That's what your house requires. So on a solar system on the roof, we typically have one microinverter per module up on the roof. They're behind the module. There's nothing in your house really. In this case, because we couldn't put the inverters underground for heat buildup and other reasons, and the code didn't allow it because they've never done this before, surprise, we had to put them in the building. So what we've got here are 4 microinverters, 4 modules per microinverter because these are smaller, and we had to put the modules in series. Too much detail, but if you want more, ask me. That's what it looks like. That's some of our team.
You don't have batteries between your...
No, battery free. And that's a big advantage because it saves you about half the cost of the system, and there's no maintenance, and there's nothing that's going to break down, and there's minimal environmental footprint. I'm a big part of that. So here's our team. All ages, as you see. This young woman here is Amy Schellenberg. Amy is an electrical instructor at the university, and she's also one of my installers. And she used to work in the tar sands and didn't want to do that anymore. She has 3 young children. And she wanted to do something good for the planet. So she moved and came to the university, and she's an incredible electrician. Ian McKenzie here, he's a community member. He's a retired teacher from Kamloops. And Ian joined the team as he calls himself an everyday person, and he's our reality check. He asks a lot of questions, he's got lots of experience, worldly experience. And then here is Ben Jaducci. Ben is an electrical engineer, and he owns another competitor of mine, that doesn't matter, a competitor in Kamloops called Riverside Energy. And he's an excellent engineer. I'm glad he was on board to help me with some of the bigger calculations. And then this is Cheryl Kabluna. Cheryl is a retired government worker. She's also the chair of the BC Sustainable Energy Association in Kamloops. She's very active in anti-pipeline movements and things like that. And that's me. So we're really proud of that project. So why do this? I mean, other than it feels good. Well, you've seen your bill go up? Okay. It's actually gone up more than you probably realize when you do the math and you graph it out. I've calculated and made a few assumptions about annual adjustment for inflation. That your bill has actually gone up about 50% since 2010. That's huge. That's actually the fastest rate growth of any jurisdiction in Canada. Even though our government constantly says we have the second lowest electricity in the country. That's true on one level, but not true when you start to factor in a lot of other things, including the rate riders, taxes, step 2, energy, and everything else. It doesn't work out that way. But it's a very nice political thing to say. So you're paying more and more per year. It works out to 7.14% averaged annualized over the 7-year period. And here's what solar can do for you, and this is why a lot of people are shifting and moving towards it. If you design your system to be big enough to offset your annual consumption, even if you make 0 in the winter months, you can take advantage of something called net metering, and I'll show you details of that. It's a program that BC Hydro has been running for 12 years, but never advertises. They don't really want you to do it, but it's in legislation. They have to, and it's all over the country and growing around the world. They have to. But they will buy back that electricity from you. So the trick here is to create a surplus in the spring, summer, and fall that will carry you as a credit through your smart meter, if you have one, through the winter months. And what a grid-tie, battery-free system does in this case is it makes power, and there's a very specific kind of curve to it based on the time of year and your location and other factors. This is pretty much a perfect solar day. A perfect solar day has a normal curve distribution. In this case, for this particular one, it started around 6, 7 in the morning. It had it needed coffee. Don't we all? It needed coffee, but it got going. And then by 9 o'clock, you'll see that it started shooting up pretty hard, a little blip there, maybe cloud cover. And you want to maximize where it stays in the peak zone. And it stayed in that peak zone pretty good until about 3, it started to decline. 5:30 or so, it started to decline hard, and then it still kept making until about 7. Pretty perfect normal curve. This is a good day of power. Now, what this solar array is, and you can see up here, is it's a 28 microinverter system. It's that one in the garage that I showed you, that nice pretty garage with a pool and a nice house. 28 LG 320s. On this day, it maxed out at 6,720 watts, and it made 45.4 kilowatts of electricity. Your average home, if you annualize it, uses about 30 a day. So it was making 50% more per day on that day than you used. And some days it'll make 50% less or 80% less than what you use. And some days it'll make more. So what does that mean? Well, let's look at it. Slightly different example, 10 kilowatt array. I had a full year of data for this one at the time. So a 10 kilowatt is 40 modules. And 40 module system sounds big, but it fit on a regular house. There's no problem with that. And when we set it up in September of 14, it was making about 40, 42, 45 a day here and there. Some days it hit 50. And 30, we'll just use that line there, is kind of the average. And then you'll see that once it got into October, mid-October, November for sure, it started to drop. And it dropped hard, right? There's no doubt about it that solar doesn't make a lot of power in October, November, and December. But it didn't make nothing. You'll see that even in December and January, there were days when it was making 15 kilowatt hours a day, half of your annualized load. But what's interesting is if you keep in mind, this is the line for the average. As soon as February, March hits, it starts to get to that line again. And then, with a few exceptions, it's consistently over. Now, if you look at what's over, this is stuff that's way over, 50s and 45s. Think of that as filling in the space when you're under on an annual basis. You can roll it over, you can flip it over, whatever in your head. On an annualized basis, this house made, you see it right here, 12,000 or kilowatt hours or 12 megawatt hours. And it used about 12 megawatt hours. So it was completely neutral. Okay. Here's what it does if you dice it a little bit more finely down to the day level. So this is actually my solar array, from September of last year. So by the end of September, I had banked, this is means I made 343 more than I used. So about 10 a day, 11 a day, I was able to put aside, in addition to my regular usage, because my system was 23 solar modules. So here is sort of a snapshot of what it looks like over those days. I'm under almost every day. That means I'm creating a credit that will roll forward. And I had credit in August, July, June, and a few other months, including part of October, that neutralized me for the rest of the year, just like I showed you with that other example. Here's a bill to die for. That was my bill for that month. Here's what pisses me off. I gave them 343 kilowatt hours, yet I still got charged the basic charge of $5.51, plus taxes and rate rider and GST and all that crap. So I had to pay them $6.08 even, no matter what, because I was connected to the grid. Oh well. But trust me, a lot of people pay more than that. So, what can we do? In 2014, I created a nonprofit called Gap Energy. And Gap Energy was set up specifically to help, initially it was to do solar community projects. But we realized that there was a lot of other low-hanging fruit. There was bigger opportunity at the time. We knew that solar had come down so much in price, yet every time people like you and I went to get a quote from a solar company, they were getting gouged, screwed. No question about it. So I went out and I said, okay, I want to start with 5 solar panels. I didn't think I could afford any more. And I went to solar companies around the region and I said, I just want 5 to start, please. And I was getting quotes of like $6,000 for 5 installed. And that didn't sit well with me. So I went onto eBay and I bought 5 solar panels for $1,000. Really nice high quality Canadian solar panels. And then I found a great deal on an older model inverter for $400 US. And then with a friend, we made our own mounting kit from discarded bed rails, angle iron, and painted it, made our own mounting kit. And for less than $2,000 with the permit, I had my 5 panels. And it was to code, and everything improved. And it was making great power. So I said, okay, people need help. So I created the nonprofit, pulled in a bunch of people that I knew that had backgrounds. And we started Gab Energy. And the low-hanging fruit was to not bulk buy, because that doesn't work anymore, because there's no advantage, but to basically develop a really good supplier relationship with a big company, and to help people by doing free site assessments of their properties, design the system for them, and initially we would sell them the equipment for cost plus 5% that would then go towards our nonprofit. And we would take that 5% and we would use it to cover our insurance, our web page, our accounting, and things like that. It got a little lean. And after a year of operation, we bumped it up eventually to 12.5%. And we started to pay some of the sales associates that we started to recruit to go out and gave them a little incentive to find clients. And we also used some of that money. Every year we would make, it was a big organization, we had about $10,000 that we would give to community groups, including arts councils and others, to build free solar arrays for them. So that model worked really well. But I have an idea for you here. Something really simple. Something that doesn't take a lot of horsepower to get going. And it involves setting up, initially, a nonprofit. That can morph into a co-op later. A nonprofit is very simple to set up. You can set one up in a day. And it's like $100. And you can start your wheel rolling with that. Salmon Arm Solar Society, SAS. Show us the SAS. Something like that, right? So you can get one of these going. You just need 3 people initially to be the board. $100 after you do the name search. And what you can do then is you can find land a little bit easier than as an individual. You can apply for BC Hydro right-of-ways. Did you know that you can actually apply to have access and ownership, so to speak, of a right-of-way? They don't like to let you know that. But if you do a right-of-way search on BC Hydro, you can make an application that fits their mandate and your mission, and you describe it and figure out all the stewardship and everything else to use land to put a solar farm on. You can also apply to have a transfer of Crown land to your nonprofit, not to an individual, but you can do it to the Crown for the nonprofit quite easily and use that as your land to start with. So here's what I propose. You start your nonprofit, you then are in a position to find land. Find land. Don't get stuck trying to do it on somebody's house or something like that. That never works. I tried that for a few years because it's just impossible to figure out stewardship and long-term ownership when people die or they sell. It's impossible. It's not worth it. No lawyer will help you on that either. Don't bother trying to put it on any kind of commercial site or lease their roof or any nonsense like that. They're never interested. I've tried lots. You could try public places, churches and things like that, good spots, places that have permanency, some history, likely to be around. But it's probably easier to start with just a small parcel of land. So here's how it could work. Here's how it could look. Start with, BC Hydro will hate you for this, but if you read their language very carefully in net metering, they can't stop you. They want you to actually use lots of electricity, and then if you're going to net meter and sell it back to them, you can get some of that back. What they would hate, but they can't stop, yeah, until you guys do it, is put a very small using shed on a property. As long as it has a meter and ownership could be the nonprofit, and it's a smart meter, it has to be a smart meter, I'm afraid. It qualifies for net metering, as long as other things are met, like transformer specs and so on, which are pretty much the case with smaller arrays. But you can buy a power shed, throw a light in it, throw a small baseboard. If there's a breaker box in it, it has to have heating anyway. Don't have to turn it on. And you are essentially a user. You have an account with BC Hydro. And then you do something completely crazy. You build a solar array on that land to power, ostensibly, this little shed. And guess what? It's all going to be credit. All of it. It's profit in that case. Now, the profit currently is 9.99 cents per kilowatt hour. That's what you get back through the net metering tariff. It's going to go up. Believe it or not, that's better than the independent power agreement that the Sunline has right now in Kimberley. So I'm suggesting the easy route. Don't try to get independent power producer status. You'll have to go over 100 kilowatts. You have to go through a lot of hoops. You got to go through public procurement processes and everything else. Do it this way. Pretend that this is a hobbit house that something the nonprofit owns, and tie it into net metering. You get the same money back without any headache. You do it now. You won't wait 10 years. Okay? So you do this, and you say, okay, what can I do? Well, maybe I want to go right to the end of how big I can get it under net metering, and that's 100 kilowatts. So, for sake of argument, I designed a 99 kilowatt system for you. That's big. That is, what would it work out to? 300, say 300 panels or so. Yeah, I think it was 300 panels. And a really good way to do it is on ground racks like this. You can use community labor and others to create some jobs, which is nice. And you can do it modularly too. You don't have to do all of it at once. You can do like part of it in stages and keep adding as you get more membership buying in to your project. And then you can sell shares. You can sell shares, say, for argument's sake, $5,000 a piece. All you need is 60 people to build this massive farm, assuming you get the land for free. And what it will do is it will make money. And with my company's pricing, just to give a very quick quote so you know what you're dealing with, it's about $300,000, $200 for the equipment, $100 for the installation, but if you do your own installation, it's variable. And you would need about 2/3 of an acre, based on inter-row spacing and shadowing and things. That's what I calculate for you. And here's what it can do. That system can make about 125,000 kilowatt hours a year, about the same as running 12, 13 houses. Completely. Okay. And you can see the breakdown based on just the generic salmon arm location. It is more site specific than that, but assuming it's good, we can do the math on that. And here's the return. The so-called break-even, which isn't really the best way to think about solar because nobody says break-even for anything. What's the break-even for your car? What's the break-even for your house? What's the break-even for your TV? What's the break-even for your cell phone? That is a construction of the oil and gas industry to dissuade people from buying into renewable energy. Nobody else does break-even. It's crap. It's made-up concept that has been foisted on you. It's another one of these myths that I was referring to. But if you still think that way, that's fine. The break-even is 15 years. But there's more to it than that. I like to explain solar as the opposite of a mortgage. So if you take out a mortgage on a house today and you're paying it off over 25 years, you're typically paying 2.5, 3 times the value of that property over the 25 years period, right? So in reality, a $200,000 house is going to cost you like $500,000 in payments over 25 years. We know that. It's the horrible part of capitalism. Really horrible, especially for young people nowadays. Solar is the opposite. It's not break-even that you should be focusing on. It's energy saved over the life of the system, typically 25 or more years. So look at this one here. Down on the bottom, over 25 years, this system will save $785,000 worth of energy on a $300,000 investment. That works out to, if you annualize it and you do the ROI calculation for the return on the investment, at about 4.1%. And that's just selling it back as a net metered 9.99, building in the rate increases that I referred to earlier of 7% per year. I have no crystal ball. I don't know what they're going to be, so I just use past trends. So how does that work in terms of shareholders then? So you've got $5,000 shares, 60 people, for argument's sake. In year one, it will give a dividend of $206. This is assuming that there's no maintenance, that there's no withholding of dividend, to the nonprofit or the co-op, if that's what you create, it's pure straight line calculation. It's not going to be that high. In the real world, you're going to hold some back. You're going to have reserves, you're going to have insurance and everything else. But this is just the pure calculation. So bear that in mind. This is perfection. So 206 in the first year, fifth year, that dividend for that year, 270. By year 25, if you hold on to that share, you'll get 1,054 in energy sales. So you can structure it any way you like. You can make it so, for example, like the Nelson Solar Farm, people can transfer shares. They can sell them. They can bequeath them, whatever. You can do it more like a co-op, where you have a fixed number of shares, and if somebody who wants to sell their shares, there's due notice periods. The co-op buys it back and reissues it. It's not like it's on the stock market. So there are lots of things that could be done. Last couple points. So what else could we do? I'm not a big supporter of Site C for a lot of reasons, but let's just look at some really simple math on this again. Site C is supposed to come in at $9 billion. It won't. No mega project comes in on budget. And these kinds of energy projects, hydro in particular, but also nuclear, typically overshoot by about 100%. It's going to be 15, 18, $20 billion in the end. I guarantee you. I've never seen a big mega project that isn't. So, but let's just pretend that we believe the numbers. And it's $9 billion. If we were to take that $9 billion instead, and remember, we don't get any subsidies for solar in BC. Not a penny. Some regional districts will give you $200 back, but they'll give you the same thing for giving back your wood stove and buying an updated one. There's no incentive for solar, per se. So if we were to do that and take that $9 billion up front, which of course is not upfront cost, we could create $900,000, $10,000 subsidies. 900,000 people could buy a solar system for maybe a few $1,000s more than the subsidy. 900,000 solar systems all of a sudden very quickly in a matter of a short few years. Think of all the jobs that would be created, ongoing as well. Think of all the opportunity for innovation. How many solar arrays do you think we have in BC? Less than 1,000. Imagine going from 1,000 to 900,000 just by reallocating this money. So I think there's things that we can do. Here's my big dream. I don't believe in reincarnation, but I wish I did, because if I came back, I could maybe see this through. Young people here, if you please do this. Look at the world. Look at the world not just as geopolitical boundaries. That's a human construction. That's changeable. We've seen it change very quickly, and it's always changing. Look at the world as a massive networked community, people, ecosystems, energy systems, and other things. And if you imagine, it doesn't have to be this big by any means, but it's actually these little ribbons. Imagine building a global network of solar arrays around the world. They probably only have to be thicker, just a little bit bigger than Donald Trump's wall, by the way. Running around the world so that as the world turns, a substantial amount of that world is powered and the rest of the world by those solar arrays. And as the world turns again, those solar arrays are light, and those are in light, and those are in light, and so on. It wouldn't take a lot. Remember the squares I showed you? It would actually probably just take a string, a line, that's like 5 meters wide on the entire planet, running with a certain pattern, with under ocean lines and so on, to keep it all connected, to power this entire planet. We could easily do that if we wanted to. When I look at what countries like the US spend on military, do you know it's 60% of their GDP? 60. It's 12 times higher than education. It's about 10 times higher than healthcare. On military. If we were to put even a fraction of what countries use for these kinds of things into a renewable, sustainable future, we wouldn't have any problems like this. They would be solved like that. So, thank you for your attention, and I hope you learned something. And see we have time for Q&A, and please ask me anything. I'll try to answer it as best I can. So thank you very much.
I'm just going to grab some water. Grab some water. So if you have a question, I'll try and give you in order. So, Ron?
What have you heard in the way of subsidies? Is there anything coming down the pipe for individuals?
I think there could be. A lot of people have been holding off on purchasing things like solar and electric cars recently in BC with the change of government, right? And of course, there was a lot of great hope when Trudeau became Prime Minister, but of course, he's basically Harper Light, in my opinion, pushing pipelines. So I wouldn't wait for subsidies. The longer people wait to actually move in this revolution, the longer it takes for them to realize their own personal benefits. So for example, I picked up the Chevy Volt this year, and I would have bought it even without the subsidy. It was a $5,000 rebate. But to drive 100 kilometers in that car cost me $1.50 in electricity. Finances made sense in and of their own. The same way solar does that without any subsidies. Yeah.
Back there.
Just talking about coal here. India's thinking of getting on board. I heard, I think it's the Gore movie the other night told us that they're approaching Silicon Valley for all their solar stuff. If you could tell us a bit about what that is. In coal, are the new coal plants that India or possibly China may even still produce some yet? Do they have all the new technology that scrubs everything off, or is it just the same old junky coal plant?
Yeah, so I'll put my cards on the table. When I lived in Saskatchewan, I was on the board of directors of SaskPower, the provincial utility company. And SaskPower was aggressively moving towards so-called clean coal technology. There's nothing clean about clean coal technology. What they're able to do is, of course, in higher oxygen environments and with a little bit of scrubber technology, able to knock off some of the CO2 and other emissions. And we've been knocking mercury off for a long time, not all of it. But there's no way that it's anywhere near clean enough to overshadow what's coming with climate change. Much more profound shift is going to be required to do that. So Trump and his emphasis on this is completely wrong-headed, in my opinion.
Thank you for your talk. I wanted to ask, you mentioned that a smart meter was required. I'm wondering if one was able to go 100% productive, could one mount their smart meter on another location in the house?
Yes. So a smart meter doesn't have to be on your house. It can be on a power pole. It can be away from your house. And you don't actually have to have the radio on feature to use solar.
Oh, you don't?
You don't. It has to be a smart meter. BC Hydro only recognizes their smart meter as the official revenue meter for both directions, for consumption and production. But as long as it's a smart meter, it can be radio off, you still have to pay that lower rating fee. And the clients who have the big tracker were very wary about smart meter technology, but they wanted solar, so they went radio off and they moved it away from the house.
And so the one question would be, Fortis is the same as BC Hydro?
Yeah, all the utility companies under the BC Utility Commission have to match things like rate structure, and they have to match program offers like net metering. Yeah. Sure.
I just wanted to ask about this thing that I've seen on the internet, like many things. It's called solar highways. It's where they, the people that created it as like to create jobs and stuff and money.
Yep.
And so the solar highways generate electricity from the sun on the highway and do a bunch of other things, like they can detect an animal on the road from like a mile away and warn someone on the road.
Exactly, you're right on the money there. So what we're doing on campus in Kamloops, and have you seen the material coming around yet? The little pieces? Okay, that is the Canadian version of the solar road system. And our goal is very similar. It's to embed sensors for things like black ice detection. So can you imagine your car being able to tell you that there's black ice ahead, right? Or, here's the best part, We were trying to figure out how to build electric charging infrastructure into the road through inductive charging and other techniques. So you probably have seen how you can charge your cell phone by not plugging it in, by putting it on a table that allows it to transfer the electricity through the air or through the material. You could have roadways as well that transfer the electricity to cars, electric cars, as they drive. So you need much smaller batteries and you never have to worry about running out. So that's kind of where we're moving with this technology. So thanks for that question.
Are there any rare elements or other limited resources that are used in making solar panels? And will that potentially be a bottleneck in the possibilities of expanding this technology?
Yeah, great question. So what it gets at is something called life cycle assessment. And there's a life cycle assessment modality that's used for various products. There have been hundreds of life cycle assessments done on the solar modules. Now, the important thing to note is that there are different kinds of solar modules. The kind that's most common, what we're using, what you're looking at today, are silicon-based. Silicon is the second most abundant element on planet Earth in the crust. It's primarily silicon and boron, and that creates the electrical difference between the two layers, the junctions between the holes that can be filled by the electron flow and the movement of the electrons between the layers. There's no rare earth elements in a standard silicon module. There's aluminum, but it doesn't have to be. There's also frameless solar modules that don't even use aluminum. A little bit of copper, of course, for the wire and diodes as well. So the solid state electronics, that's silicon. But there are other kinds of solar modules that people often mix up with silicon, like tellurium, selenide types. There's others that contain a lot of nanomaterials that contain a much more toxic cocktail of chemicals, some rare earths, and have a much more significant environmental footprint. I don't use those. I don't care if their efficiency is twice as high. I don't believe in them because I think we have to minimize our impact as much as we can. Batteries, of course, are a different story. If we're moving towards lithium ion, clearly there are challenges. But there are now saltwater batteries, and my company actually sells one called Aqueon, which you could use for home systems, that don't have any toxic chemicals in them. So it's a matter of technological platform.
John?
Our group, we're going to be hosting a land leasing rental workshop coming up in a month or so.
Excellent.
Farmers typically don't earn enough money. They have to have an off-farm income. Can they start up a solar farm along with this, and that be the second income?
They do that all over Ontario. In fact, if you've seen what's happening in southern Ontario, it's a solar renaissance. It's just everywhere. And it's mostly farms. In Ontario, they kind of got into trouble through their power purchase agreements with solar. And it's one of the reasons why there's a little bit of resistance now for these kinds of programs more globally. So when they first came out, their feed-in tariffs, as they're called, were 80 cents per kilowatt hour. 80 cents, and we buy it at like to 8. So they were getting crushed. It was a stupid decision, but the government decided to do that because at the same time they had to make some really tough political decisions about closing down coal around Toronto, the coal plants, and they were also having some serious trouble with the base load for the nuclear plants, and the cost of refurbishing them were 10 billion plus. So it was sort of an economic decision. But they've now gone down lower and lower and lower in Ontario. They're actually pretty close to what we do with net metering, and they're moving in the same direction we're at. So yeah, there's no doubt that a farmer can do this. The only way they would actually make enough money relative to their initial investment is to buy equipment at a very competitive price, and perhaps to do the bulk of the installation themselves, and then just bring in an electrician for the final interconnect. But it's definitely doable.
My brother was surprised by the fire chief of his home in New Hampshire. The fire band had just been to a conference in which they were told about the dangers of solar panels on roofs. Because apparently they continue to produce electricity even though maybe the system is shut down below them, and that they can be electrocuted trying to get through the roof to put out the fire.
Yeah, there have been hardly any solar-related fires in Canada.
No fire.
Yeah.
electrocution of firemen.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. I think what they're referring to are the older based systems that were string inverters. They were high voltage DC systems that were running up to 600 volts across your roof. And if there was an arc fault and there was like a disconnected wire or one of the connectors came loose, there could be an arc fault. There's definitely was a risk with those. But what I'm showing you, the microinverter, is a completely different approach. It's actually an AC unit. There's no DC running across your house. So we've got 240 volt, 1 amp per microinverter running across your roof on an insulated trunk cable. So it's a completely different situation. It's one of the reasons why we moved in this direction, and there are lots of other advantages. So I've never heard that recently.
I understood that the business of net metering, like plugging right into the grid, that was a problem for individual residences. But you're saying it's not? All you need is a smart meter and you can...
It's easy. BC probably has the easiest application process for net metering in the country. It's a one-page application. Any homeowner can do it, but an installer will do it for you as well. And all they have to do is send in sort of a pre-authorization to BC Hydro with your address, your meter number, the size of the system, and then BC Hydro gets back to you and says whether or not it will connect to their grid properly. I've never heard of anybody being returned down. And then once you get your final electrical permit, you submit it to BC Hydro. They basically turn a switch, and then the meter is able to be programmed in both directions. It's really simple. Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah, I was wondering about the practicality of, you showed the graph in the winter with the sun generation. Was there any snow in that location? Like what happened if there's a couple feet of snow on you?
Yeah, so a lot depends on the angle the modules are mounted at. In areas where there is snow load, you want to have them a little bit angled, say at a 30-degree pitch. The optimal angle for annual production at your latitude here in Kamloops is 40 degrees. So anything over 30, 40, it'll just run down. And because it's dark, black or blue, depending on the material that we use, for the module surface, it gets hot very quickly, so it melts. They have studied what happens when you don't remove snow. So at NATE in Edmonton, the technical college, they did an analysis 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago, comparing one array that was cleaned and another array right beside it that was not cleaned. And they found that there was still production through the snow in Edmonton, and that it only made a difference of about 4 or 5% per year when annualized out over the system life. Because, of course, those months weren't good solar producing months anyway. Yeah.
I was intrigued by your comment about you can paint over your sidewalk units when they wear down.
Mm-hmm.
Could you apply that to the sidewalk?
Yes. Yes, you can. So those little skinny modules that I showed you, the little small one, we're coming out with one that's 3 millimeters thick, so half that thickness. And it could even be less based on the polymers that we use. I'd like to have them so they can actually be self-adhesive.
Yeah.
So can you imagine?
I've got a painter.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, can you imagine being able to tile the south side of your house with these? Yeah.
Lavergne?
Might kill painting.
Can I have a solar window?
Yes, they're not commercially available in Canada, but there are lots of pilot projects around the world that use thin film on solar, on windows, so they're very thin, not quite cellophane, they have a bit of a blue tinge from what I understand, but they are developing those thin films. In Germany, they've been working very aggressively on solar photovoltaic paint. So imagine being able to paint a surface like a roof or the side of a house or a car, and to be able to produce electricity through that material. That's going to be a revolution.
I just had one further question. Back when they were taking over our rivers with the Run of the River project, they had a buyback rate that was established, and it was really high.
Yeah.
But I don't remember what it was. Do you know what that is? Because it would be very useful.
Yeah, they don't publish those rates. They're all proprietary contracts, but
Also, Canadians made it really clear back when they were negotiating them originally. I just wondered if
I know there were some FOIs, free immigration requests, that came out maybe 6 years ago or so, and some of the rates were like 20 cents per kilowatt hour. But every contractor had a different rate. I guess depending on how much you donated to Christy Clark's government back then. My guess.
Linda?
shelf life is on a module,
Yep.
and also what the breakability is, like pounds per square inch?
Yeah, so the modules themselves, there's different kinds, obviously. The standard module that people buy, you can buy it with different kinds of frames too. So for example, if it's in a really windy location or where there's lots of snow load or other things, you can get them with slightly ruggedized frames. So thicker aluminum frames, so they're more rigid. They're not all equivalent. You have to kind of work with somebody who knows what you need to occur. The module life is minimum 25 years. There are modules out there that are making power still after 30 years. And of course, we'll look at what we power our space stations and satellites with in the most extreme environments. Of course, it's not the exact same material, but it's still silicon-based modules. So they're tough. I've seen pictures of our friend who had a place up in the precipice, and he was completely off-grid up there for 30 years with solar modules, old ones. And a tree had fallen on one of his modules and snapped the thing in half. It was like cut right down the middle. And it was still making power on the half that had the conductors. So they are durable. They typically have, most manufacturers like Chinese or Korean or even American and some Canadian, have a 12-year workmanship warranty. That's kind of the industry standard. But they also have a 25-year, most of them, 25-year power performance warranty, where they say that after 25 years, they expect the silicon in production not to degrade below a certain amount. It's usually like 90% of original spec. It is important to note that the modules are not the only thing. It is the electronics behind them, the microinverters, that are really important to talk about. So if you're going with what most solar companies use, which are the big string inverters, the high voltage DC systems, those things typically don't last more than 10 or 12 years. So you have to replace the string inverter up front every 10 or 12 years. If you go with microinverters, because of the technology that's in them and the heat dissipation and other things, they're a 25-year warranty, no questions asked with most companies.
Price difference?
25 years with Enphase and other products.
What price difference?
Huge, pretty equivalent actually. So the one I'm passing around right now, wholesale to me is about 130, and I sell them for about 160. Okay. So they're pretty inexpensive.
The back? Yes.
Being it's a battery-free system, where are you storing your peaks at?
Where am I storing?
The peaks.
Oh, in the grid. So
As long as the grid is there, if this thing goes overboard,
yeah.
or everybody has it,
Yeah.
no more effect.
Well, I don't think everybody's going to have it. We're a far distance from saturation. What needs to happen as we move towards more distributed generation like renewables, including solar, is better and better grid control. BC Hydro doesn't have world-leading grid control as far as I'm concerned. When I worked in Saskatchewan, we had very sophisticated grid control centers that were able to take advantage of when the wind all of a sudden picked up, so we can turn down our thermal plants a little bit or backstop our hydro a little bit and turn things up and down. We were able to balance the load of the entire system across the whole range of distributed and non-distributed utility production systems. BC doesn't really have a good grasp on that yet because they've been locked into the mega project hydro model for so long. So I don't think it's going to be a problem. The calculation that's typically done on where that becomes an issue is around 20, 23, 24% saturation. We are not even 0.1% saturation. When we get closer to that, storage becomes critical.
Sir in the red at the back, you got a hand up?
You have one too, sir.
Doesn't have a hand up. Hand's gone down. Just a little commercial break. Just so you know, you can see there are food preparations going on at the back, and after we end, there will be a little grub for everybody. And also mention another process that's going on, which ties into energy, but it doesn't seem so. It's about food. And you probably know that every Wednesday evening for four more, there are going to be conversations about food at the college, 7 p.m. In the first door that you come in as you get there. So that's another thing that's going on in town. It doesn't seem to relate to energy, but if you grow your food locally, it's the most energy efficient way to get your food, is to buy local food.
And they're free.
Any further questions?
Can I emphasize something on that? Yes. Did you know that your footprint for your CO2 footprint for food is higher than transportation?
Hugh?
When you're all electric car, what's the impact of heating and air conditioning on the range?
Yeah,
For
so
example, if you're driving 300 kilometers and minus 30 degree temperatures, and you've got the heat full on, so what do you lose in 300 kilometers?
you're mostly losing range in an electric car from the absolute temperature of the battery to begin with. The addition of those other loads like heating and cooling add to it. So for instance, with the Volt, and every car is somewhat different, it has a heat pump, which is incredibly efficient for heating and cooling. 3 times more usually to 4 times more than simple resistance heating and other kinds of heating. So when I drive my Volt in the winter time on electric, I can get, with the heat on, defrost on, everything else, about 65k range. But I can get another 500 because it also has an onboard gas generator to boost it if I need distance, right? In the summer, I get about 95 to 100 with air conditioning on and driving. Because the battery just gives you more range in the warmer temperatures.
With neither on?
With neither on, I wouldn't do that. Definitely not Kamloops. So on the way over here, just to give you an idea. So on the way over here tonight, my trip was 114 kilometers door to door. And by about 80, I ran out of battery. But my car instantly kicked over to the onboard generator. So I did the remainder 34 on gas. So my whole trip used 2 liters of gasoline, which is way over 100 miles per gallon.
More questions? Sure. Yes, go ahead.
So are you figuring out how to put those tiles like on the top of your car and the loop to increase, to add?
Oh, you mean to on the car itself with photovoltaics? Yeah, you know, there are cars that do that. There was an earlier version of the Prius plug-in hybrid, the first generation, I believe, had that, then they removed it, and now they're bringing it back. I understand that Nissan Leaf is supposed to be coming out with a solar roof option. I would really like to actually make my next big project solar photovoltaic skinning options for cars. So you know when you skin a car for advertising purposes or whatever, imagine being able to skin it for PV purposes. But here's the best part, not just for electric cars, but for any car. So you can imagine that if your car is fully skinned, it is a mobile, massive solar module. You can pull it into your home driveway, plug in, supplement your home, maybe not a lot, but maybe a couple hundred watts, 300 watts, run your TV, computer, whatever. Or, what I really like is, look at all the parking lots at work and malls and wherever else full of cars sitting there in the sun all day. Why aren't they producing power and plugging into the grid and putting that back in? And you could even have your own little meter in the car that makes money for you. So depending on where you park, you get money from that vendor. The Uber of mobile solar-powered cars, you can actually maybe get involved in a spot market. Some company says, oh my God, we're getting killed, we're in step 2 pricing. Could you come park in front of our place instead so we don't have to buy so much? That's where I'd like to go. I know it's crazy, but...
If you're not enthusiastic after hearing Michael, you've been asleep, and I'll...
Dream big!
Maybe we'll go for one last question or comment, and then Ann can... Thank you.
So storage is a big issue with solar power because you don't have solar in the nighttime and all that. Do you see anything coming up the pipe as far as new technologies in storage, or do you see BC Hydro transitioning to a power storage kind of utility where they actually pump water up the rivers and store it in the dam or something like that?
I see different things, and you're right. Storage is important. Renewable energy is not what they call dispatchable. You can't put it online when you need it to meet base load and other things, peaks, right? It's episodic. Although it's relatively predictable for solar based on patterns, it still varies quite a bit. The cloud goes overhead, power system, everything drops, right? Winds stop for sure. Tidal is a little bit better because we can actually, with tidal, current, and not wave, but the others, we can predict the power of the system based on the tidal charts, which can go forward like 100 years. So that's different. So you have to start thinking about it, as I was suggesting, more organically as a whole system with grid control. Just to give you a taste of where it could be without batteries and still have storage, and not just water storage in the traditional sense either. Toronto Hydro has put in place a pioneering project in Lake Ontario. It's big bladders that are filled with compressed air from surplus power that's produced during the day from renewables, or even at night from wind. And they've stored these big bladders, are massive, in the bottom of the lake full of air. And they're able to draw on them to run a Wells turbine to produce electricity when they need it. Yeah. So again, thinking outside the box.
Yeah. It's a new use for bladders that I, as a physician, never knew about. And would you like to come forward and thank you?
Before I thank our speaker and others, I'd like to just mention something that I should have mentioned earlier, and that is that I want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded territory of the Secwepemc people. I'm sorry I didn't mention that at the beginning. Another thing, I want to draw your attention to the fact that we've got a take-home sheet that has a web address at the top of it of the BC Sustainable Energy Association. And it's really important that you know about this organization. They have a vast amount of information, easily accessible. They have webinars, and the handout tonight describes a bit about what you've been hearing about tonight. Oh yes, the other thing is there's a sign-up sheet at the back for anyone who's interested in following through on forming a salmon arm sustainable or solar energy society. So please put your name down and how we can contact you, and I'll undertake to coordinate that unless somebody else wants to do it. So I think that would be a really important follow-up from tonight's program. So I want to begin by thanking, first of all, our speaker, Dr. Michael Mehta, who has given us a very stimulating and interesting address this evening. Could you join me in thanking him?
Thanks, everybody. Anne didn't tell you something else that was very important that we discovered tonight. Do you want to tell it, or should I tell it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So her husband passed away 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Was one of the graduate chair of my program at York University back in the 90s. And I had no idea until I met her today and saw the picture up on the wall.
It's a small world sometimes. And I'd like to thank Warren Bell, our facilitator, and I want to thank Hugh Tyson, our technical genius who puts wires and things together so that they work. And I'd like to thank Victor Toy and his assistant for videotaping this program, because we realized after we'd set the date that all our city councillors are in Vancouver for the UBCM meeting. And so we want them to be able to see this too. So fortunately, Victor agreed to videotape. So without further ado, I invite you to help yourself to refreshments at the back.